Evan and Laura Whitmore appeared to be the perfect couple, but behind Evan's polished smile and successful career was a dark secret so twisted it would end in the brutal murder of his devoted wife and shock an entire community to its core. Evan and Laura Whitmore lived in one of the quietest neighborhoods in Clarksville, Tennessee. Their two-story home sat on a corner lot, surrounded by manicured hedges and a white picket fence. From the outside, they looked like the kind of couple others aspired to be. Evan was a respected financial advisor who had built a reputation for being reliable and sharp, often appearing at local events or giving tips on morning radio shows. Laura, a former schoolteacher turned home baker, was equally beloved. Her cakes and pastries had become a local hit, and her small business operated from a custom kitchen Evan had paid to have built just for her. Their love story was well known. They had met in high school, dated through college, and eventually married in a spring ceremony that seemed straight out of a magazine. Photos from that day: Laura in a delicate lace gown, Evan in a crisp gray suit, still hung on the walls of their home. Friends often said the Whitmores were proof that long-term love still existed in a world full of breakups and betrayals. Neighbors admired their routine. Morning jogs together, shared grocery runs, weekend brunches, and porch-side coffee on Sundays. There was a harmony in the way they moved, spoke, and lived, so much so that no one ever thought to question what went on when no one was watching. Behind the curated perfection, subtle cracks had begun to form. Laura's closest friends noticed she wasn't as cheerful as she used to be. She had stopped attending her monthly book club and started canceling lunch plans. When asked, she would brush it off, too busy with baking orders or just tired. But there was an undercurrent of unease in her voice, a stiffness in her smile that hinted at something deeper. Evan, on the other hand, remained his usual charismatic self in public, although he had become more controlling at home. He had started showing up during her deliveries, checking her messages under the guise of helping with business, and becoming irritated when she spent too much time on the phone with her sister. Still, no one suspected anything serious. Relationships go through rough patches, they told themselves. Maybe it was stress. Maybe they were trying to have a baby and struggling. People filled in the blanks with their own assumptions, never once thinking the truth might be darker than anything they could imagine. In early March of 2023, Laura posted a picture of a chocolate-tiered cake with raspberry filling, captioned with a simple, "Busy week ahead." It was the last time anyone would hear from her online. Her baking page went silent. Her personal accounts were left untouched. At first, it didn't raise alarm. People assumed she was buried under custom orders. But when she missed her niece's birthday party, a date she had been excited about for weeks, her sister Allison began to worry. Calls went unanswered. Messages were read but not replied to. When Allison drove to Laura's house, she found the mailbox stuffed with flyers and unopened letters. Lights were on, even during the day. Laura's car was parked in the driveway, but no one answered the door. Evan eventually appeared, looking tired and annoyed. He claimed Laura had left days ago after a heated argument and hadn't returned. He said he thought she needed space and expected her to come back soon. He didn't seem panicked or particularly concerned. To Allison, something felt very wrong. A few days later, Allison filed a missing person report. Police officers visited the Whitmore home. Evan was cooperative, at least on the surface. He repeated the story about the argument. Said Laura had taken some cash, left without saying where she was going, and hadn't checked in since. There was no history of abuse, no prior complaints, no obvious signs of a struggle. But the officers left with a strange feeling about Evan's calmness, his slightly rehearsed tone, and the way he shifted the focus of every question back onto Laura's supposed instability. Soon after, investigators began checking Laura's phone records, bank accounts, and social media activity. The last call she made was to a bakery supplier, around 7:42 p.m. on March 20th. Nothing after that. No withdrawals. No online activity. A security camera from a neighbor's house showed Laura returning home that night carrying groceries. She was never seen leaving again. Evan maintained his story. He told anyone who asked that Laura was overwhelmed and needed to get away. But he also began to withdraw from public life. He stopped attending church, skipped work meetings, and ignored texts from friends. Rumors started to circulate. Some said Laura had run off with another man. Others whispered about Evan's growing obsession with control. The idyllic image of the Whitmores began to unravel. Then came the discovery of Laura's car, abandoned in a parking lot nearly an hour away. The vehicle was locked, and inside were her purse, wallet, and phone. There were no signs of forced entry, no blood, no struggle. But the location was odd. It wasn't a place Laura was known to visit. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses failed to show who had parked the car. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Police now considered foul play. A second search of the Whitmore home was conducted, this time with cadaver dogs and forensic equipment. They examined the basement, the backyard, the garage. Everything appeared clean. Too clean. Fresh paint in certain areas raised suspicions, and parts of the basement floor showed signs of recent renovation. Still, nothing concrete tied Evan to a crime. There was no body, no confession, and no eyewitnesses. But the feeling among investigators and Laura's family was growing colder by the day. What had started as a simple case of a woman disappearing was quickly becoming something far more chilling. Under the surface of Evan and Laura's perfect marriage was a history no one had seen coming. One filled with secrecy, tension, and, as police would soon uncover, a truth far more horrifying than anyone was prepared to face. After Laura Whitmore was officially declared missing, the Clarksville Police Department escalated their efforts. Detectives assigned to the case began piecing together a timeline, starting with the last confirmed sighting of Laura on March 20th. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's front door camera captured her returning home shortly after 8 p.m. carrying grocery bags. Her demeanor appeared normal, no signs of distress, no evidence that anything was wrong. That image became the last trace of her ever seen alive. Evan Whitmore told officers she had left after an argument that night. He claimed Laura packed a small bag and drove off without saying where she was going. When pressed about the nature of the argument, Evan described vague complaints, stress, financial pressure, growing tension about her baking business consuming too much time. Nothing specific, nothing violent. He described Laura as emotional and impulsive, painting her as the type to walk away when overwhelmed. But those who knew Laura disagreed. She was calm, thoughtful, methodical in everything she did. Her sudden disappearance didn't align with her character. Detectives began questioning family members, friends, neighbors, and even Laura's clients. One neighbor recalled hearing raised voices on the night of March 20th but couldn't tell what was being said. Another said Evan had been unusually distant in the days following Laura's disappearance, not responding to greetings or engaging in conversation like he normally would. Several of Laura's close friends noted that she had become increasingly private over the past 2 months. One of them recalled Laura confessing that she and Evan were not doing well, though she never elaborated. While Evan maintained a calm exterior, his actions didn't match the urgency typically shown by a worried spouse. He didn't post about Laura on social media, didn't organize any searches, and didn't reach out to her friends or relatives to gather clues. When Allison, Laura's sister, asked if he'd checked hospitals or shelters, Evan said he assumed Laura would return when she was ready. His detachment raised red flags for the investigators. The investigation deepened when Laura's car was located in a strip mall parking lot 40 miles away. The car was neatly parked, locked, and untouched for several days. Inside, detectives found her purse, wallet, car keys, and cell phone. There were no fingerprints other than hers. The gas tank was nearly full, and the car showed no signs of damage. Surveillance footage from businesses in the area provided no helpful insight. The car had been left during hours when security cameras weren't recording. To detectives, it felt staged. The car's discovery forced the investigation to shift from a voluntary disappearance to a potential homicide. Statistically, when a woman goes missing and her belongings are found undisturbed, the outcome is often grim. Investigators began digging deeper into Evan's life. A search warrant was granted for his phone and computer. What they found began to paint a disturbing picture. Deleted messages, recovered through forensic tools, revealed multiple conversations between Evan and a woman named Marissa, living in Atlanta. The conversations were flirtatious at first, but over time they became explicit. Evan had been involved in a full-blown affair for over a year. He'd visited Marissa under the pretense of business trips, used prepaid phones to communicate, and had even discussed moving to Atlanta permanently. Even more damning were Evan's recent online searches: how to conceal a body, decomposition timelines, cleaning blood from carpet, and how long it takes for a missing person report to be taken seriously. Investigators now believed Laura never left the house on her own. Every piece of new evidence chipped away at Evan's story. Detectives returned to the Whitmore residence for a more thorough forensic sweep. This time, they used luminol to detect traces of blood in the home. In the master bedroom, faint stains glowed along the edge of the carpet and baseboards. The mattress had recently been replaced. Parts of the closet floor showed signs of cleaning, and freshly caulked sections of the basement wall were identified. When questioned, Evan claimed the house had undergone minor repairs and cleaning due to a mold issue, an excuse that quickly unraveled under scrutiny. Investigators brought in cadaver dogs. One of the dogs alerted in the basement. Another alert occurred in the garage near a stack of storage bins. The area was searched carefully. While no body was found, small biological traces, hair and blood matching Laura's DNA, were collected. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a clear, horrifying image. Police also examined Evan's financial records. In the months leading up to Laura's disappearance, he had made several large cash withdrawals from their joint account. These funds were traced to hotel stays, expensive dinners, and gifts sent to Marissa. Additionally, a new life insurance policy had been taken out on Laura just 5 months earlier, listing Evan as the sole beneficiary. Though no confession had been made and Laura's body had yet to be recovered, investigators were now convinced they were dealing with a premeditated murder. Evan was brought in for formal questioning. His demeanor changed. He appeared irritated, defensive, and increasingly uncooperative. When confronted with the evidence, he denied everything, insisting the affair had nothing to do with Laura's disappearance and that she had likely run off to start over somewhere. Without a body, prosecutors hesitated to file murder charges immediately. However, public pressure mounted as the story began to gain local and regional media coverage. Laura's sister appeared in news interviews, pleading for answers. Candlelight vigils were held. Posters of Laura's face were taped to every telephone pole in town. The quiet community of Clarksville was now consumed by fear and speculation. As the case moved forward, a task force was assigned to comb through every inch of the Whitmore property. Soil samples were taken from the backyard. Nearby woods were searched. Drones scanned the fields behind the neighborhood. And slowly, the illusion of the Whitmores' perfect life faded into a haunting mystery, one filled with betrayal, secrets, and the sickening feeling that someone had gotten away with murder. Despite no official charges yet being filed, the momentum was building. The smallest mistake on Evan's part, one overlooked clue, one slip in his story, could turn the case entirely. And then, almost exactly 3 weeks after Laura was reported missing, investigators found something in the basement wall that would change everything. Hidden behind a recently installed panel, covered in insulation and plastic sheeting, was a sealed storage container. Inside was the answer everyone feared, but needed to know. The brutal truth was finally surfacing. The discovery in the basement of the Whitmore home sent a wave of shock and horror through the Clarksville community. Inside the sealed storage container, carefully hidden behind insulation and recently installed drywall, investigators found the decomposing body of Laura Whitmore. She had been wrapped tightly in plastic and blankets, her hands bound, her face covered in duct tape. The medical examiner's report confirmed what detectives had feared. Laura had been strangled to death. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting she had either been caught off guard or subdued quickly. The estimated time of death matched the night she was last seen. The investigation shifted from a missing person case to a homicide, and Evan Whitmore, once seen as a grieving husband, became the prime suspect in a cold-blooded murder. With the body recovered, the evidence that had previously seemed circumstantial now carried undeniable weight. The blood traces in the bedroom and basement, the searches on Evan's computer, the recent life insurance policy, and the secret affair, all pointed to premeditation. The container itself had been purchased 2 weeks before Laura's disappearance, further proving that the murder was planned well in advance. Evan was arrested at a local gym where he had been seen working out as if nothing were wrong. The arrest was swift, silent, and without resistance. Within hours, news broke of the discovery, and Evan's name was plastered across headlines. The media descended on the small town. Reporters lined the streets outside the Whitmore home, now sealed with crime scene tape. Neighbors who once praised Evan now expressed disgust and disbelief. Some admitted they had noticed his odd behavior, but never imagined he was capable of something so horrific. Inside the interrogation room, Evan maintained his innocence. He denied killing his wife, claiming the evidence had been planted or misinterpreted. He offered no explanation for the body hidden in his own basement, nor for the tools and materials purchased weeks prior. As the evidence continued to mount, so did the urgency to uncover his motive. Prosecutors believed that money and the desire to start a new life with his mistress had driven Evan to kill. They speculated that Laura discovered the affair and the financial betrayal, possibly threatening to leave or expose him. In Evan's mind, eliminating her may have seemed like the only way to avoid ruin. Details from the autopsy deepened the horror. Laura had bruising around her neck and face, consistent with manual strangulation. There were no signs of sexual assault, but the violence was unmistakable. The medical examiner determined she had died quickly, but not instantly. The final moments of her life had been filled with terror and helplessness, at the hands of the man she had trusted most. Police continued searching the house and property for more clues. In the garage, they found a notebook buried beneath tools in a locked cabinet. Inside were sketches and notes outlining ways to dispose of a body, alibis Evan had rehearsed, and even a draft of a public statement he planned to post after Laura was gone. The level of detail was disturbing. It was no crime of passion. It was calculated, methodical, and chilling in its precision. Detectives also interviewed Marissa, the woman Evan had been having an affair with. She was visibly shaken by the news and claimed she had no idea Evan was capable of violence. According to her, Evan told her that his marriage was over and that he was in the process of a divorce. He had hinted that Laura was mentally unstable and emotionally abusive, a tactic he used to garner sympathy and justification for his behavior. Marissa cooperated fully, handing over her phone and emails. Among the messages, investigators found phrases that now felt sinister. Evan had written, "Soon everything will be different," and "We just have to wait a little longer." As prosecutors prepared their case, the town of Clarksville continued to grapple with the enormity of what had happened. Candlelight vigils were held in Laura's memory. Her former students, fellow teachers, and baking clients came forward with stories of her kindness, her humor, and her deep love for life. Allison, her sister, emerged as a fierce advocate, pushing for awareness of hidden abuse and manipulation in relationships that appear perfect from the outside. Evan's trial date was set for the fall. His defense team argued that the case was built on assumptions and media frenzy. They claimed the evidence was circumstantial and that Evan had been framed or manipulated into silence. But the weight of the forensic data, the recovered messages, and the financial motives left little room for doubt. Prosecutors described Evan as a narcissist who believed he could get away with murder because he had controlled the narrative for so long. They painted a picture of a man who valued his image, his control, and his desires more than the life of the woman who had stood by him for over a decade. The trial was set to be one of the most high-profile cases in the state. Jurors were carefully selected, and security was heightened due to the media coverage. Inside the courtroom, photos of Laura's body and home were shown, eliciting gasps from the audience. The prosecution methodically laid out the timeline, the purchases, the lies, and the digital trail that led straight to Evan. Witnesses included forensic experts, family members, friends, and even the store clerk who sold Evan the container later used to hide Laura's body. Evan showed little emotion throughout the proceedings. He rarely looked at the jury and never once glanced at Laura's grieving family. His lack of remorse became a focal point for prosecutors, who argued it was further proof of his cold, calculated nature. The jury was visibly disturbed by the details presented. The case had gone from a mysterious disappearance to a graphic display of betrayal, violence, and deceit. When the prosecution rested, Evan's defense tried to shift blame, suggesting alternate theories and claiming the evidence had been misinterpreted. But the narrative was too strong, the facts too clear. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. After only 5 hours of deliberation, Evan Whitmore was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted with emotion. Laura's family wept, holding one another as the weight of justice settled in. Evan was escorted out in handcuffs, his once perfect life now reduced to a lifetime behind bars. In the aftermath, the Whitmore home was sold to a distant buyer. The neighborhood moved on slowly, forever marked by the darkness that had festered behind white walls and picture-perfect smiles. For those who knew Laura, the pain remained, but so did her memory, bright kind and unbroken, even in the face of unimaginable betrayal. The media frenzy surrounding Evan Whitmore's conviction didn't fade quickly. True crime podcasts, local news specials, and online forums dissected every piece of the case. Documentaries were pitched, reporters chased down old friends and co-workers, and the town of Clarksville remained at the center of national attention for months. The story had everything: a seemingly perfect marriage, a double life, financial betrayal, a brutal murder, and a shocking concealment. It resonated with people in the worst way. It made them question what darkness might lie behind familiar doors. Despite Evan's conviction, there were still unanswered questions that lingered in the minds of many. Why had Laura stayed with Evan if she sensed something was wrong? Did she ever truly suspect the danger she was in? And perhaps most haunting, what would have happened if the body hadn't been found? Would Evan have walked away free, living a new life with the woman he was secretly planning a future with? Investigators, though no longer under the pressure of solving a disappearance, continued reviewing elements of the case to ensure nothing had been missed. They wanted to understand every step Evan had taken in the weeks before and after the murder. One chilling discovery came from cell tower data that placed Evan in rural areas surrounding Clarksville in the early morning hours of March 21st, just hours after Laura was last seen. He had driven to multiple isolated spots, including a stretch of woods and an abandoned gravel quarry. It became clear that Evan had considered other methods of disposal before ultimately deciding to hide her in the basement. Whether he changed his mind due to fear, logistics, or time constraints remained unknown, but the pattern of movement suggested careful planning. The discovery also revealed how close Evan had come to getting away with everything. If not for a minor error in drywall placement, an uneven edge spotted during the second forensic sweep, Laura A.'s body might have remained hidden indefinitely. That mistake was a turning point, not just in the case, but in the public's understanding of how close evil can lurk behind normalcy. Laura's sister Allison took a more visible role in the aftermath. She established a foundation in Laura's name dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence, particularly those who suffer in silence within seemingly healthy relationships. She worked with lawmakers to advocate for better monitoring of spousal abuse patterns, including digital surveillance, financial manipulation, and emotional isolation. Her campaign grew rapidly, fueled by the very public nature of Laura's story. For many, Laura became a symbol of hidden suffering, a reminder that not all wounds are visible, and not all dangers announce themselves with raised fists. Meanwhile, inside the prison where Evan was serving his life sentence, he remained mostly quiet. He had no visitors, received little mail, and spoke to no reporters. Inmates who shared cell blocks with him described him as withdrawn, emotionless, and deeply self-absorbed. Despite his silence, court documents revealed Evan had filed an appeal through a public defender, claiming improper handling of evidence and bias during jury selection. The appeal was widely viewed as a formality, with little chance of success. The court swiftly denied it, citing overwhelming proof of guilt. Public fascination with the case began to shift from Evan's actions to Laura's legacy. People were inspired by her work ethic, her creativity, and the way she brought light into others' lives. Former students posted online tributes about how she encouraged them, how her love of literature and kindness shaped their lives. Her baking business, once a small side hustle, became a symbol of her independence and passion. Some of her former clients hosted bake sales and fundraisers in her memory, donating proceeds to Allison's foundation. As the months passed, Clarksville slowly began to heal. The house where Laura had lived and died was sold at auction, the buyers reportedly unaware of its history. It underwent renovation, and the basement was completely redone. Still, neighbors admitted the place carried a strange silence, as if it remembered. No matter the changes, the community knew what had happened there. Children stopped riding bikes down that stretch of the street. People crossed the road to avoid it. It had become a landmark of horror, dressed in fresh paint but haunted by what lay beneath. Reporters who followed up on the story found that Marissa, the woman Evan had been involved with, had moved back to Florida and changed her name. She refused all interviews, but released a short written statement through her attorney. In it, she expressed devastation over Laura S.'s death and said she had no idea what Evan was capable of. She called him manipulative and deceptive, someone who spun lies with ease and charm. She apologized to Laura's family and said she would live the rest of her life burdened by the guilt of being involved, even unknowingly, in such a tragedy. From the outside, Evan Whitmore had embodied success, a career in finance, a beautiful wife, a picture-perfect home. But that image, carefully cultivated for years, masked a growing darkness. The affair, the deceit, the financial mismanagement, and finally the murder, all revealed a man consumed by entitlement and ego. He believed he could control the narrative, erase the person who threatened it, and build a new life unburdened by consequences. But it was one detail, a crooked panel in a basement wall, that shattered that illusion completely. The trial transcripts became public record and were studied by criminologists and psychologists alike. Experts noted Evan's emotional detachment and methodical planning as signs of a personality disorder. They categorized his crime as not just a murder, but an execution of control, an ultimate assertion of power over a woman he no longer saw as a partner, but as an obstacle. The absence of remorse, the meticulous concealment, and the coldness of his defense strategy all pointed to a deeply disturbed mind, one far more dangerous than his polished exterior suggested. For Allison and Laura's parents, the pain of her death would never truly fade. But they chose to use their grief as a catalyst for change. They spoke at conferences, schools, and counseling centers. They emphasized the importance of noticing red flags, of listening closely when loved ones grow distant or fearful. They advocated for stronger safety nets and early intervention resources. And through all of it, they kept Laura's memory alive. Not as a victim, but as a vibrant woman whose life mattered. The story of Evan and Laura Whitmore was no longer just a headline or a tragic case file. It became a cautionary tale, a study in deception, and a heartbreaking reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear wedding rings, smile at neighbors, and say all the right things, until the moment they decide to silence the truth forever. Months turned into a year, and while the media cycle moved on to newer stories, the echo of Laura Whitmore's murder remained deeply rooted in the town of Clarksville. What had begun as a missing person report had grown into one of the most chilling criminal cases in the region's history. And though justice had been served in the courtroom, the ripple effects of Evan Whitmore's actions continued to be felt far beyond the walls of his prison cell. In the time that followed, the Whitmore case became part of training materials for new detectives and forensic teams. The importance of subtle clues, like uneven drywall or unusual purchasing patterns, was emphasized in lectures and workshops. Investigators who had worked the case were invited to conferences and law enforcement panels, where they detailed how meticulous attention to detail helped uncover a hidden crime that nearly went undetected. It was used as a real-world example of how appearances can be deceiving and how even well-executed concealment can unravel under scrutiny. But beyond academia and law enforcement, it was the emotional fallout that left the deepest scars. Laura's family struggled to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Her parents moved to a quieter town in the north, hoping distance might lessen the reminders of what they'd lost. They left behind the house where Laura had grown up, unable to bear the weight of memories that once brought joy, but now carried too much pain. Allison, Laura's younger sister, stayed in Clarksville. She became a prominent figure in the community, her work through the Laura Whitmore Foundation continuing to grow. The foundation partnered with local shelters and advocacy groups, offering counseling, legal assistance, and housing support for women trying to escape emotionally or physically abusive relationships. Allison frequently spoke about the kind of abuse that leaves no bruises, the subtle erosion of independence, the manipulation, the secrets that isolate victims from those who could help them. Her mission gained traction, especially among younger women. Schools began incorporating awareness programs, encouraging students to speak out and recognize early warning signs in relationships. Allison used Laura's story not to inspire fear, but to empower. She reminded people that what happened to her sister wasn't the result of naivety or weakness, but of trust misplaced in someone determined to exploit it. Meanwhile, inside the maximum security prison where Evan served his life sentence, time moved differently. He remained largely isolated, his infamy making him a target of both inmates and correctional officers. He spent most of his days in his cell, reading books from the prison library and writing in notebooks he kept hidden from view. Rumors circulated that he was working on a memoir or some type of manuscript, but nothing official ever surfaced. Whether he intended to profit off his crime or simply sought to explain his version of events, no one knew. Despite his conviction, Evan never offered a full confession. He never wrote a letter to Laura's family, never accepted an interview, never spoke publicly about the crime. That silence, to many, was the final insult, a refusal to acknowledge the devastation he had caused, or the humanity of the woman he had murdered. Psychologists who reviewed his case speculated that Evan's refusal to speak was a form of control, a last desperate attempt to keep ownership of the narrative that had once defined his life. One day, almost 2 years after the verdict, Evan was found unconscious in his cell. He had attempted to take his own life using bedsheets tied to the edge of his bunk. Guards found him in time to prevent death, but he spent several weeks in the prison infirmary. The incident prompted a new wave of media attention, though this time the tone had changed. There was no sympathy, only a renewed sense of disgust. For many, it confirmed what they had long believed, that Evan was never remorseful, only afraid of facing the full weight of what he had done. The prison transferred him to a different wing with increased surveillance. His privileges were reduced, and he was placed under regular psychiatric observation. During these evaluations, professionals noted his extreme detachment and refusal to discuss Laura or the case. He displayed traits consistent with narcissistic personality disorder, grandiosity, lack of empathy, and an obsession with control. When asked about remorse, Evan remained indifferent, claiming he had nothing to apologize for, and that the world had misunderstood him. This reinforced what prosecutors and experts had said all along. Evan wasn't a man driven to a desperate act. He was someone who believed he could outsmart the consequences. His entire life had been built on image and manipulation. When that image was threatened, he chose murder over exposure, and even behind bars, he clung to the illusion of superiority. In contrast, Laura's impact only grew. On the anniversary of her death, the town held a public memorial at the local park. Hundreds attended, including her former students, clients, neighbors, and co-workers. They lit candles, shared stories, and honored the life she had lived, rather than the way it had ended. A small plaque was placed near the park's garden in her memory. It read, "In loving memory of Laura Whitmore, a light extinguished too soon, but never forgotten." The Laura Whitmore Foundation expanded beyond Clarksville, launching programs in other counties and offering virtual counseling services. Donations increased, especially after a nationally televised segment reignited interest in the case. Allison continued to lead the organization with unwavering determination, carrying her sister's legacy forward, one life at a time. As for the house on Maple Ridge Lane, it changed hands again. The new owners declined interviews, preferring privacy and peace. Over time, the whispers faded. Children returned to riding bikes down the street. The flowers in the yard bloomed again. But those who had lived through it never forgot. They remembered the nights filled with helicopters and search dogs, the days of waiting for updates, the heartbreak of the discovery. They remembered Laura. What made the case unforgettable wasn't just the horror. It was the deception. A man who smiled in family photos, who hosted barbecues, who kissed his wife goodbye every morning had harbored the darkest intentions. It wasn't a random act of violence. It was the deliberate dismantling of a life by the very person who had promised to protect it. In the end, Laura Whitmore became more than a victim. She became a catalyst for change, a symbol of strength, and a reminder that beneath the surface of even the most perfect lives, terrible secrets can hide. Her story warned of danger, yes, but it also inspired hope. That justice could be found, that legacies can rise from tragedy, and that even in the darkest chapters, light still finds a way through.